Welcome to TIDS Linnean Timeline Podcast. Today's guest is Professor Thomas Seyfried, Professor of Biology, Genetics, and Biochemistry at Boston College. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, social media, and to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Without further ado, here is the conversation between Professor Thomas Seyfried and Ilir Demir.
To come around with this metabolic.
Yeah, I hope so. Because it's not only cancer; it's most of the chronic diseases.
Yeah.
Is I understand. I'm just an amateur. I'm not a professional, but I've had a lot of diseases myself that's gone away thanks to diet. And so I mean, it's not a coincidence. It happens to too many people to just be a coincidence.
At all.
Yeah. So I don't know if we could start by. A lot of listeners, or some listeners, maybe don't know you and your background and what you do. So the traditional introduction would be nice.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here to speak with you today. I'm a professor of biology here at Boston College in the city of Boston, Massachusetts, and I teach general biology, and I have a class in cancer metabolism that I teach. So I've been doing research and writing papers on cancer metabolism for about 25 years. But before that, I did work on, I have a degree in genetics and in biochemistry. I did lipid biochemistry, worked in the epilepsy field for decades, managing epilepsy, mapping genes, and then using metabolic therapies to manage epilepsy. But right now, most of my work has shifted to cancer metabolism and the management, both the how cancer arises, how we manage it, and how we can prevent it. So that's the main thrust of what I do, and I have professional staff of scientists, graduate students, and technicians that all work on the different projects related to this subject material.
Okay, interesting. Is there a reason why you chose cancer specifically?
No, I
and
mean,
cancer metabolism?
we drifted into that. It wasn't a plan to ever do what I'm doing. That was not the plan. I did work on ganglioside biochemistry, which complex glycosphingolipids, where some of the people in Sweden, Lars Svenneholm, these guys were leaders in ganglioside biochemistry. And I was working at Yale with the late Robert Yu. We were looking at tumors and comparing human tumor with mouse tumors for their ganglioside structure and function. We try to figure it out, but it was very, very complicated, and it wasn't always clear. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, what the differences were between mouse glioblastomas and human glioblastomas. It was a real complicated mess. But when we were doing epileptic seizures, we were, using diet therapies, and one thing leads to another, and we're then applying diet therapies to the brain cancer mice. They were managing epilepsy, and then we found out, wow, they were even more powerful in managing brain cancer. So then we started to look into the origin of how that's working, and we come back to Otto Warburg, who had it pretty well understood back in the early part of the 20th century. And I read most of his work and read it over and over again, and did our own research that was parallel, and the findings were explainable by his idea of what cancer was. So I then realized why did people not jump on Warburg, follow his work? And they do. They call it the Warburg effect, but they misunderstood it. They misunderstood that. So I was collecting data that supported the work of Otto Warburg, but we extended it. We showed why he was correct and why he was incorrect, and then we did something he did not do, and that was exploit our understanding of cancer metabolism for effective clinical therapies. He drifted more toward try to prevent cancer by maintaining the health of the mitochondria in electron transport chain proteins. In other words, more going towards prevention, knowing what he knew. We decided that we would go more towards management, because I realized that you can talk all you want about prevention, but people are more concerned once you have cancer, what are you going to do for me? And using Warburg's knowledge and our preclinical findings, we were able to develop um, metabolic therapy, ketogenic metabolic therapy, which is a program that integrates drugs and diets for the non-toxic management of cancer. And we were able to find that all major cancers are similar in their dependency on fermentation energy for fuel, as Warburg said. And we identified glucose and gluten. Everybody knew glucose was a driver, but they always thought glutamine, the amino acid, was respired. It's not, it's fermented. So we have come up with something very new in cancer, and that is an amino acid that's fermented, giving us energy without oxygen. And Warburg knew nothing about, in fact, the whole cancer field, most of the people in the cancer field have no clue about this. But what it does is it explains more comprehensively what the underlying problems are with the cancer cell, and how we can kill those cells without toxicity or harming the rest of the body. It will take time for the field to understand this because they're locked into this incorrect theory that cancer is a genetic disease. The evidence is so strong now that you have to be cognitively impaired to think that cancer is a genetic disease. Because when you start looking at the data, only that could explain how you are not able to understand this.
Is that obvious?
It's so obvious. You have cancer cells that have no mutations that nobody likes to talk about. You have driver gene mutations in normal tissues that never become cancer. You have cancer is very rare in our closest relatives, chimpanzees, or in our primitive people. And then you have the most powerful evidence of all is the nuclear mitochondrial transfer experiments, which rule out is just one more solid piece of evidence to suggest that cancer cannot be a genetic disease. So once you realize that it's a mitochondrial metabolic disease, and then you've seen therapies in the clinic that have a remarkable therapeutic benefit, it's because you're targeting the fuels the cancer cells need to live and grow. And everything comes back to what Warburg said: without energy, nothing can grow. Get over it. Energy is the foundational principle of life and growth. How the cancer cells live and grow? They use fermentation. Why? Because their oxidative phosphorylation is incapacitated, inefficient. And we've shown direct evidence to prove this. We did the metabolic pathways. We're showing exactly how these cancer cells are living. And therefore, when you pull the plug on their fermentable fuels, they die. And they can't switch to fatty acids and ketones. So they're very limited in what they're capable of doing to survive. So we publish these papers. We do research all the time. And then we have our clinic friends in the clinical field applying diet drug combinations to manage cancer and get very, very good effects. So no clinical trials because nobody believes what we're doing. And they think cancer is a genetic disease. If you think it's something other than it is, why are you doing what we're doing?
Yeah, it's strange. How is the response from the industry when you guys have this obvious proof that it's not a genetic disease?
Yeah, they basically ignore it. They don't discuss it, or they say I can't be right because everybody else says something different. It's called confirmation bias. You can't. It's very, very hard to change someone's brain when they have been indoctrinated to think differently. You're talking about generations of physicians and scientists who have all been trained to know that cancer is a genetic disease. They've awarded Nobel Prizes to these folks, claiming we get Nobel Prizes for immunotherapies, for the discovery of oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes and this kind of stuff. And all that stuff is downstream. The immunotherapies are based on the somatic mutation theory of cancer. Cancer is out of control in the world today. In the United States, we have over almost 1,700 people a day dying from cancer in the United States. That's about 70 an hour. Okay. Worldwide, it's getting worse and worse. Why is that? Because the belief of what it is and how to treat it is based on an incorrect theory of what the nature of the disease is. It's a mitochondrial metabolic disease driven by fermentation metabolism because oxidative phosphorylation is insufficient. It's not a genetic disease. So, because we have cancers that have no mutations, we have driver mutations in normal tissues that never become cancer, and then we have the nuclear transfer experiments, which people should read. It completely undermines the whole concept of cancer as a disease of genetic mutations. So I went through all this in my publications, in the book that I wrote, which is now selling more copies than it's ever sold when I published it. So somebody must be reading it. Is a gradual change in attitude once you look at the data. But if you do not look at the data and you are brainwashed into thinking cancer is a genetic disease, so I call it ideological dogma and confirmation bias. This is no different than religion or a political affiliation. You are very difficult to get someone of Islamic faith to immediately recognize Judaism as the true religion. Not going to happen, or vice versa. If you have been brainwashed to think that cancer is a genetic disease and someone tells you it's not, and here's the evidence to say, I don't want to believe it. I'm sorry, I just can't believe that. I'm locked into a dogmatic view. How can the National Cancer Institute of the United States be wrong? On their website, they clearly say cancer is a genetic disease. It's 100 different kinds of diseases with all different kinds of mutations. That's incorrect. We cannot find any tumor that can survive without fermentation metabolism. What does that mean? All these
Yeah.
mutations are downstream epiphenomena effects. They're not the cause.
But if it is to be a genetic disease, we can see that it's clearly increasing the cancer in the world. It's even increasing here in Sweden. And if it's a genetic disease,
Well, no,
shouldn't it just be randomly?
Yeah,
or...
but that's there's two kinds. You're thinking germline genetics, and then you think of somatic genetics. So
Okay.
somatic genetics, that's why they call it somatic mutation theory of cancer. It's a genetic problem. In your diet and lifestyle, you will collect mutations from carcinogens and all these different kinds of things. So people say, what is cancer? Cancer is dysregulated cell growth. How do you get dysregulated cell growth? Oh, obviously from mutations in tumor suppressor genes and in oncogenes, right? So these are seen in cancer. I'm not saying they're not seen; they're definitely there, but they come as the result of downstream effects from disrupted oxidative energy metabolism. Okay, so when you look at a cancer, most cancer cells have thousands and thousands of different kinds of mutations. Yes, there are some cancer cells that have no mutations, but they're very rare and nobody talks about them. So, but there's most of the cancers, they have thousands, sometimes up to 1 million different mutations inside cancer cells. And when you take a tumor and separate individual cells and look at expand the cell and look at the genome of the cell, you find thousands of different kinds of mutations. But every cell seems to have a very different genetic profile than another cell in the same tumor. They're not consistent across, even within a tumor or across tumors. So they say,
Is
well,
that
some like
because they're in
P53
different
mutations,
phases?
they seem to be more common than others. That's true, they are, but they're not markers for. They're not all tumors have that mutation. And then you say, well, where did these mutations come from? And when the mitochondria become corrupted, they produce oxygen radicals, hydroxide ion, superoxide ion. These are carcinogenic and mutagenic. So the mutations that you see in the nucleus are downstream effects of mitochondrial dysfunction, producing ROS rather than ATP. So yes, we see a lot of mutations in cancer cells. All kinds of tumors have different mutations. The problem is, their common problem is they're all fermenters, no matter where they come from: breast cancer, brain cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer. When we look at their metabolism, they're all fermenting. And then when we say, well, what are they using for fermentation? In other words, energy without oxygen. And the only fuels that we could find that are the predominant, you have to have two things. You have to be able to use it as energy source, and it has to be abundant enough in the microenvironment to replace oxygen to replace ATP synthesis from oxidative phosphorylation. And those two fuels are glucose, the sugar glucose, and the amino acid glutamine, the most abundant amino acid in our body. Glutamine is used as a fermentable amino acid fermentation, glutamine. This is not known to the cancer field. They all think glutamine is respired. Wrong. We tested this. It's fermented. It's called amino acid fermentation, and it occurs in the mitochondria itself. So it's an internal mitochondrial fermentation process independent of oxidative phosphorylation. So this is a big discovery in the field of cancer. It's been known, but we're the first ones to actually highlight it. If you're in cardiac physiology, you know that when a person has a heart attack, the bloodstream accumulates lactic acid and succinic acid. These are waste products of glucose fermentation and amino acid fermentation. Okay, when we have a heart attack, our oxygen stops to our body, and in order to survive and keep membrane pumps functioning, we have to have an immediate available source of energy that can replace the energy that's being stopped because of the absence of oxygen. So our bodies immediately shift to a fermentation metabolism, burning sugar glucose with the lactic acid waste product, and they ferment lactic glucose to lactic acid, and they now ferment glutamine to succinic acid. This can only happen for a short period of time before you die. We notice now in cancer cells, they consistently produce lactic acid and consistently produce succinic acid. Why? Because their oxidative phosphorylation has been inefficient, corrupted. It's not capable of sustaining any longer energy through oxidative phosphorylation. So consequently, they're locked in to a chronic production of energy through substrate level phosphorylation in the cytoplasm and in the mitochondria. These are different energy sources. And what happens then is that the organelle controlling the differentiated state, the quiescent state of our cells, loses that control, falls back on fermentation, which is the default energy metabolism of all of our cells, and locked in, they lose control of the growth. So the organelle maintaining growth control is defective, and the cells fall to their default state, which is proliferation. These cancer cells are doing nothing more than falling back on ancient heirloom metabolic pathways that existed before oxygen came into the environment 2.5 billion years ago. And as long as they have the available fuels in the microenvironment to sustain their fermentation metabolism, they will grow in a dysregulated way. Because the organelle, we have never found any tumor cell that has a normal number, structure, and function of mitochondria. How do we know this? We look at electron microscopy of all these major human cancers, and we look at the data, and they all find abnormalities, number, structure, and function of mitochondria. This is so clear. The problem is nobody's looking at the data. It's unbelievable. People who do research in cancer rarely read anything outside of their silo of information that they look at. So if you think cancer is a genetic disease, you're only looking at genetic mutations. You're not looking at the other parts of the problem.
Yeah. Could they be scared of something to maybe lose funding or something? Is that why they work in their silos and refuse to look at the data?
Yeah, because NIH awards grants for a lot of genomic studies. And then if they think there's some metabolism, they're always trying to explain it on some genetic mutation. No, the mutations are the effect of the destabilizer. So they got the cart before the horse. And you can't get your grants awarded if you're going to think that cancer is not a genetic disease. It's a mitochondrial metabolic disease. It's the theory under which you do the studies. If the theory says that this is a genetic disease, then you must study some aspect of the genome. And if you're studying metabolism, it's got to be a gene-driven abnormality in the metabolism, not the reverse. So consequently, this continues. And it's not just our government, the United States. You can go and look at all major cancer centers throughout the world, in the Western world, and they're all funding all this genomic stuff. And they're developing immunotherapies, CAR T immunotherapy, these PD-L1 inhibitors, PD-1 receptors, all this kind of stuff. That's based on the somatic mutation theory of cancer. If cancer is not a genetic disease, then those therapies will never be optimal for the majority of people. And that can explain why cancer is out of control. In other words, we're not making any advances in significantly reducing the death rate. Yes, there are some people who respond remarkably well, but not the majority of people. They're killed many times by these drugs. So we have, because the theory is incorrect. How long will it take the cancer field to realize that this is a mitochondrial metabolic problem, not a genetic problem? And as long as they're continuing to do, we're not going to make any major advances. It's just that simple. And it's very similar to the helio that when we recognized the Earth as the center of the solar system. It was the geocentric theory said the Earth was immovable and everything revolved around the Earth, the sun and the planets. And it took 1,800 years from the work of Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo to change the idea that the Earth moves and as simply one of the planets that circles around the sun. Okay, for centuries they were trying to introduce epicycles to explain phenomena that were never fully explained. Everything made sense as soon as you put the sun in the center of the solar system. With respect to cancer, as soon as you put the mitochondria in the center of the problem, we're going to see death rates drop significantly because we know how now to manage the disease without toxicity. The problem is people don't read the literature. They don't want to know what I said, and they're locked into the status quo driven by academic, hospital, and pharmaceutical industries. They're very comfortable to maintain the status quo, but it ain't working, man. The people are
No.
dying, and they're dying miserably. And many of them are dying from the very drugs that they're being used to treat because they cannot understand what I'm saying. I publish this, I make it as clear. And when people who do not have a dog in the fight or are not indoctrinated understand it well, and they can see the outcome because they're not linked into a dogmatic view. But most of the people that are doing cancer research and developing drugs, they're all in the dogma. They're all in the confirmation bias. They can't think. And do they not want to think? The system is very comfortable as we sit here today, right?
Yeah.
Massive
Yeah.
profits are made on cancer industry. The whole industry is riding on a bedrock of sand. And once the people understand what I'm saying and see the evidence supporting what I'm saying, read the scientific evidence, look at the results, and you'll come to realize that cancer is a mitochondrial metabolic disorder driven by a combination of fermentation of the glucose, the sugar glucose, and the amino acid glutamine. And if we can, and they can't use ketones or fatty acids as an alternative fuel. So we know now clearly how to manage cancer effectively without toxicity. Problem is nobody's doing this because they think it's a genetic disease, that they're still locked into the incorrect theory.
Could we? You mentioned before that the cancer cells uses an ancient pathway to get energy. Could we dive into that a little bit more, so I can understand?
Yeah.
And compared to a healthy cell, how does that get energy compared to the cancer cell?
Yeah. Well, that I mean, when we considered life on Earth, don't forget life on Earth evolved in a hypoxic environment. There was no oxygen in the environment. Yet we had, from fossil records of individual cells, there were cells that were dividing and growing in a hypoxic environment. Okay, Albert Szent-Györgyi said this was the alpha period of existence on Earth. It was a purely hypoxic, no oxygen environment, and all cells at that time grew in unbridled proliferation. There was no regulation of how they grew. They grew dysregulated and grew as long as there were fermentable fuels in the microenvironment to sustain the proliferation. They would grow, and when the fermentable fuels dissipated, they would die. But then there were some cells that began to make oxygen. These cyanobacteria began to produce oxygen for our environment, gradually shifting from an anoxic to a hypoxic environment. And then there was the fusion between one of these bacteria and a fermentable cell, which was the origin of metazoan life on the planet. When we finally had two organisms that fused together, one organism that could use oxygen as a very effective acceptor of electrons, and the other organism that would generate energy through a fermentation mechanism. But gradually, as these organisms evolved, we then began to produce metazoans, which are multicellular organisms, and that was the result of using energy more efficiently. Because when you can use energy more efficiently, you can do a lot more things more efficiently. And gradually we evolved organisms on Earth over millions and millions of years. And all of our cells, except the red blood cells, have a nucleus and a mitochondria in most of our cells. And the mitochondria is responsible for the energy generation of the cell, but it does a hell of a lot more. The mitochondria control the cell cycle through calcium signaling linked to the proton motive gradient within that organelle. So the differentiated state of our cells in our body, which are not growing out of control, are regulated by the metabolic homeostasis of the mitochondria. But all of our cells take glucose and prepare it to pyruvate for full oxidation. The waste products of oxidative phosphorylation are water and CO2, carbon dioxide. So you and I are speaking right now, or listening and speaking and looking. And I'm taking in oxygen, you are taking in oxygen, and we breathe out moisture and we breathe out CO2. And we're focused on what we do. The issue here is we're generating tremendous amounts of energy in our cells in a very highly efficient process, letting oxygen accept electrons and producing a proton motive gradient in the mitochondria that allows us to produce energy highly, highly efficiently. But we're using an ancient pathway to get from the fuel that we eat to the pyruvate before it can be fully oxidized. That's the ancient heirloomic pathway. And we know in our bodies that it produces energy, but in a very low amount, except when oxygen in the environment becomes corrupted or blocked. Then all of a sudden we have to fall back, and we see a tremendous burst of succinic acid and lactic acid in our bloodstream, because we have to replace a highly efficient system with an inefficient system. But inefficient systems do not they produce waste. So a lot of, don't forget, when we break the bonds down from the food that we eat, those carbon hydrogen bonds were initially created by the energy of the sun through a photosynthetic process. When we take those foods and metabolize them in the body, we are breaking the carbon hydrogen bonds made initially by the sun. And we're breaking that. And when we break those bonds, we release the energy of the sun to give us the energy of our metabolism. It's an energy metabolism. Okay, but when you get energy through fermentation, that's the energy that existed before we had oxygen in the atmosphere. They produce tiny amounts of energy, except when the oxygen becomes depleted. Then they turn on but the waste products are seen. But they can only do that for a short period of time before you're dead, because if you don't have oxygen from a heart attack, and you don't get resuscitated and bring the oxygen back, you kill your brain and you essentially die from brain failure, basically. But right, so this is how the body works. But the cancer cell is locked in to this inefficient metabolism because there's chronic disruption of oxidative phosphorylation in that organelle. But it takes a long time for a cell to go from a fully respiratory cell to a cell that ferments like a cancer cell. You have to corrupt and interrupt the efficiency of oxidative phosphorylation chronically. Because if you do it acutely, like cyanide, you want to know how fast you die when you take cyanide? Why you die so fast when you take cyanide? You're dead like within a minute. Because you block oxidative phosphorylation. The body has no chance to compensate. But cancer cells are damaged chronically from any number of assaults in the environment: chemical carcinogens, papilloma, oncogenic viruses, intermittent hypoxia, systemic inflammation. All these things will damage oxidative. And what you do is you damage this chronically over time, years, and then over time, the cell gradually transitions to a fermentation metabolism. Mitochondria sends a cell signal to the nucleus. The nucleus then turns on oncogenes to allow a higher level of fermentation fuels to enter into the cell. So the cell gradually adapts to a fermentation metabolism, but in doing so, it falls back on dysregulated growth, according to what we saw through evolutionary pasts. So what we're seeing here is cancer is just falling back on ancient heirlooms of proliferation, no longer regulated by oxidative phosphorylation. So when you understand evolutionary biology and biochemistry, all this makes perfect sense and it's all supported. But if you think cancer is a genetic disease, everything that I'm saying makes no sense. I never heard of it. How can you say this stuff? So you see,
Yeah.
you have to understand the theories that explain the phenomenon. And mitochondrial metabolic theory explains the phenomenon of dysregulated cell growth in cancer far more completely than does the somatic mutation theory.
Okay. And why is that? Why tumors also grow uncontrolled?
Yeah.
Is it because this
Well, they grow uncontrolled because the organelle that regulates the differentiated state is now damaged.
it's corrupted?
Yeah. So the mitochondria control the cell cycle through the cyclins. The calcium signaling coming out of the mitochondria controls the cyclins. So when you have dysregulated growth, you fall back on your default state, which is proliferation, which is the way all cells existed on the planet before they were able to use oxygen. So these cells, energy is everything. Where are they getting their energy from? Fermentation. Okay, well, what are the fuels that drive fermentation? They have to be there in abundance because it's a very inefficient system. So you better make sure your supply of fermentation fuels are available. Otherwise, you're going to die. And glucose and glutamine are the most abundant two fermentable fuels. And we did tests to test. What we do is we grow cancer cells in salt solution, right? And they die. And we take a stopwatch and see how long it takes for them to die. Mouse cells die faster than human cells because the basal metabolic rate is different. Mouse is 7-fold faster than human, so they use up fuels quickly and die, okay, internally. And then we go back and we add single amino acids or single sugars to the environment to see which perks them up. It's very simple. Just add stuff back. So we went through all 20 amino acids, and boy, you give them glutamine, boom, you immediately see energy produced. Bioluminescence, energy, ATP starts to be produced when you give them. Yes, you can get some from other amino acids, but it's very small compared to what glutamine can give you. And of course, there are other sugars besides glucose, but they're never there in abundance. You got to have a fuel that's there in abundance, and that will drive the dysregulated growth. So you have to have the amino acid to drive. You need the amino acid for DNA and RNA synthesis. So when they replicate, they have the metabolites to grow. And you need energy. You need energy and metabolites. And the carbons from sugar and the nitrogen and carbons from glutamine are what drives the dysregulated growth of these tumor cells. And they can't switch to fatty acids or ketone bodies. We tested them. They cannot do this. In the absence of glucose and glutamine, they can't transition over. In fact, they store fatty acids in the cytoplasm as lipid droplets because they can't use them for energy. So once you know the biology and biochemistry of the disease you're working with, the solution to the problem becomes readily apparent. It's crystal clear to me what we would need to do to manage cancer. The problem is nobody's doing this. What I said, I might as well be speaking in some different language, a language that no one on the planet seems to understand. Go back to some ancient, rare language that no one has a translation for. And everybody just scratches their head. Yet they don't read the scientific literature. And if they read the scientific literature, they don't understand it. And then they'll say, well, there's no clinical trials. What you're saying can't be right. What do you mean? Who's going to do the clinical trial, right? It's just unbelievable. Once you understand what I'm talking about and have a chance to look at the literature and compare and contrast the two theories explaining how a disease forms, any rational human being using a rational form of understanding will completely see that cancer cannot be a somatic mutation disorder. It's a mitochondrial metabolic problem.
I mean, for someone like me, it even makes a lot of sense. And I think the professors you show it to, they understand it too. I think they don't want to understand it.
Well, that's a different issue. I agree with you. That's a different issue. In other words, yes, I think Seyfried is correct. But if he's correct, we can't live in this world. Then we have to change everything, and change is always very difficult for people, especially when the status quo is so financially comfortable for revenue generation.
And I think the research, they're so into it. Businesses are really into it. Hospitals, there's too much to lose, I guess.
I think that's true. But what about the patient? Do we not care about the patient? The poor individual suffering with this disorder. Does not that individual have any role or focus. And of course they say he does. We're very interested. Okay, if you're interested in the patient, then you should be treating them with metabolic therapy. Now all of a sudden the
Yeah.
patient doesn't mean anything. So
No,
it's just a
we're just numbers in a Excel spreadsheet. That's what we are,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I think, of course, they don't say that when you go to the oncology clinics. They
No.
just, look at you and say, "Oh, we have so much that we can do for you, and so much we can help you," and they always talk in soft ways and make you feel very comfortable, and you're getting the best treatment. Well, how come we have 1,700 people a day dying from this disease, and the ones that are
Yeah.
surviving are brutalized? And not to say that we don't have millions of cancer survivors of standards of care. That's we do, but many, many, many of them pay a terrible price for this survival. They have all kinds of secondary problems, gut issues, mental acuity issues. You have bone
Yeah.
density issues. You have hormonal disturbance issues. You have all kinds of other ailments that reduce your quality of life and longevity on the planet. So,
Yeah.
but you survived your cancer. You should be thankful. But now I have to suffer with all these other things. What? That's nuts. We can get rid of this cancer. And that's what I developed with my colleagues, the press pulse metabolic therapy, where we
Yeah.
gradually degrade cancer while enhancing the health and vitality of the normal cells. So we press glucose down and we pulse glutamine because glutamine is needed for the immune system. We can't be too aggressive because we need the immune system to pick up the dead tumor cells. So you have to work and you have to always remember the body can heal itself if given the opportunity. We understand the power of the normal cells to work with metabolic therapy to eliminate the tumor cells. So we understand systems physiology. We understand the metabolic problem that exists in the tumor cells, and we understand the flexibility of metabolism in normal cells. So we can play different organ systems and systems physiology to facilitate the degrading of the tumor without toxicity. And if you look at Maggie and Brad Jones's documentary on this, they're doing a big documentary on the cancer revolution, how
Hmm.
Warburg started it, how Pete Peterson kept it alive, and how our research today at Boston College is spearheading the eventual management and resolution of this disease, giving people an opportunity to live longer. We're not saying we can cure cancer. All we can say is we can manage it far more effectively than what's presently done. And whether people get a cure or not, we don't know. Pablo Kelly from UK and Devon, England, has now survived with a glioblastoma for 10 years. Did we cure him? No. He still has this tumor in his head and he gets it debulked every 3 years, but he's in a metabolic state allowing him to live longer. Do we celebrate that? Absolutely. Had he done standard of care, he would have been dead years and years ago. So, and you think that, oh, people say to me, oh, that's an N of one. That's only one guy. Well, do you think you might want to try it on somebody else? No, no, no. We have to do standard of care. That's what I'm
Hmm.
saying. The system locks you in to do only what you're
Yeah.
trained to do. You're not allowed to be flexible. I have
But do you guys have your own clinics?
we can't set up a clinic yet because we're still working. Who's going to train? We have to train. The physicians need to be trained. There's a training mission that goes on. I just can't take any. Now physicians are starting to learn this. They're starting to appreciate this because some of their own patients. Now, here's the strange thing we find often. I don't know how to explain this. Many of the patients are people. I'm not a physician. I don't treat anybody. I just give them educational information. But some of my colleagues and the patients work together and they do metabolic therapy for a variety of cancers, colorectal cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, all this, with stage fours, terminal. And then they go back, they do metabolic therapy, and many of them this tumor shrunk, they feel healthy, and the doctors are always, the oncologists are always miffed. They say, well, wow, this is really remarkable. Wow, I never saw anything like this before. I don't know what you did, but just keep on doing it. Well, I
Hmm.
said, what the hell? Don't you even want to know? Why don't you want to know
Exactly.
what this guy did to
Yeah,
get
that's
that
a
coming?
big
Oh, they don't
problem.
want to know. It's like they don't want to know. And it's like, what the hell? What kind of training did these folks have that prevents them from thinking rationally?
Or
It's
just
one of our gifts
the
as a
human
human. We think
factor.
rationally. How they
Yeah.
not want to do that? I have no clue.
But wouldn't they want to know in a human sense that
Yes,
you can save maybe somebody else?
yes. A lot of them get angry. because you didn't follow their rules, and you got an outcome that was better than what they would have predicted. So they get upset.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh wow, I really want to know what you did because I might want to apply it in my clinic because it seems to work really well. No, they don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And a lot of them say, a lot of cancer patients come and say, how can I restrict my glucose? And they say nothing has nothing to do with cancer. Cancer has nothing to do with sugar and amino acids and all this stuff. Just eat whatever you
Yeah.
want to eat. Just take my radiation and poisonous chemicals, and you'll be fine. It's like,
Yeah.
what
They
the
told.
hell?
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah. They told
it's
me
a
the same
sad,
for
it's a
30
tragedy,
years.
a tragedy.
Yeah. I had eczema, very severe eczema for 30 years. And they always said it's nothing you can do about it. It's not the lifestyle. It's not the food. And then I fixed it myself. And they like you say, they just said like, how weird.
Yeah,
And they didn't even care how I did it.
no, that's the same. I don't know what it is. They do something to the brain of these physicians. They're
Yeah.
smart people, but there's something happened to their brain. They can't think rationally outside of what they've been trained to think.
Or it's
Not
pride.
all. I don't want to blame it on all. They're good people. They're doing what they were trained to do, but they seem to either not want to know or are restricted from knowing. And there's a system that controls them, and that's the standards of care for cancer. So radiation,
Yeah.
chemosurgery, in whatever way you want to do it, but that seems to be before they'll consider anything other. You have to be on death's doorstep. None of the stuff they worked, and then they throw their hands up. Okay, now you might want to consider metabolic therapy or something else. Well, you're a dead man walking by that time. They did everything
Yeah.
to try to kill you when you're still alive, and they say, "What's going on?" So I mean, the whole thing is just nuts, and the whole field needs an enema. They need to know that what they're doing is incorrect. It's based on the wrong concept of what the disease is that they're working on. And I'll tell you, if unless that happens, we're going to see more and more dead people. And what I'm seeing is younger and younger people are emailing me for help in their late 20s and mid 30s. And I'm saying, what the hell? Why is somebody 33 years old with massive colorectal, breast cancer, all these kinds of cancers? And it's diet and lifestyle. We have put ourselves into a very different lifestyle than we had when we evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in the Paleolithic period as a hunter gatherer. A lot of exercise, eat organic foods all the time, very much into activities. Um, okay, most people at that time died of injuries and infections, but we have people on the planet today living according to ancestral ways, and cancer is very, very low in those folks. Um,
Where do we find that?
huh?
Where do we find
Well,
those
you can
people?
look at the work of um, uh, what's his name, the humanitarian physician Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer, of course, it wasn't recently, but there in the book that came out from recently on diets and cancer, we find that folks that live according to traditional way, cancer is very, very rare. Um, Before Western civilization, foods and lifestyles come into the population, the Inuits of the Arctic Circle were very rare in cancer, and now they're loaded. I gave a lecture to the medical school at Thunder Bay, Canada, that services the Inuits, the Eskimos, if you want, whatever you want to call them. They were some of the healthiest people in the 1800s, early 1900s. As soon as Western diet lifestyle hit them, they're loaded with diabetes, cancer, dementia, all kinds of stuff. Where did that
Yeah.
come? How can you have thousands of years of health and all of a sudden, within a few generations, be some of the most sickly people on the planet? This is diet and lifestyle. This is not a genetic predisposition or any of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But Albert Schweitzer has documented in his work with the Africans. They said cancer extremely rare, but then when you look at Western people, they're a lot. Cancer is quite common, and they've done a lot of demographic kinds of studies. So clearly, we are now within the last 50 years. We were in agronomy for centuries. Many countries did a lot of farming and this kind of stuff. This is a lot of exercise, eating natural foods, avoiding. There was no highly processed carbohydrates. in our diets. Most people were locavores. They ate the food that they grew in their backyard. They killed the animal that they had. They ate everything was natural. Now we have global food distribution around the planet. I have a Twinkie here. I use it in my class. This is a snack, right? The Twinkies, Hostess
Yeah.
Twinkies. You can look at them here, right? Can you see them there?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
look at
I
this
see.
thing. This Twinkie is 10 years old.
What? No
it's
way.
it's still edible. It's stale, but a mouse broke into the box last year and ate one of these things.
And he survived.
I didn't find his dead body here, so he ran off somewhere. But the idea is the damn stuff can be 10 years old. This is not natural. This stuff will kill you in large amounts.
It's not even food.
No, if you look at the ingredients, they got more chemicals. They got more chemicals listed in this thing than you can. You need a chemical degree to figure out what the hell you're eating.
Yeah.
And then people say, "I don't know how I got cancer." you have a poor diet, poor lifestyle. You're stressed out, right? You're maximally stressed out from sitting in traffic or whatever, your financial situation, home life, or whatever. I'm stressed out. Don't get exercise. Eat highly processed foods. And then, I don't know where I got cancer. What are you kidding me? And you know how hard it is for your body? You have to abuse the hell out of your body in order for you to develop a dysregulated growth in some place. You really have to chronically abuse your body to get cancer. And sitting in front of computers, getting all freaked out on cell phones, no exercise, or eating highly processed carbohydrates or food that is poor in nutrition, all come together as a diet and lifestyle, giving you damage to oxidative phosphorylation, followed by compensatory substrate level phosphorylation, dysregulated cell growth, and what we call cancer.
Yeah. But what about cancer in, for example, children that are like 2-3 years old?
Yeah, well, when we look at their tumors, they're fermenting like crazy. So how did oxidative phosphorylation become damaged in a child, sometimes in utero? Okay. So there are developmental abnormalities that can interrupt oxygen flow to a certain population of cells in a certain tissue. And I don't know about transplacental transport of certain drugs that the mother. Now, if the mother is obese and eating a poor diet and lifestyle, does that have any impact on creating a problem for the fetus or a newborn? And sometimes I see little children, at least in this country, I don't know about other countries, kids that are 4 and 5 years old that are morbidly obese. What the hell is going on with that? Is this parental neglect? Do these parents not know that this puts that child at a terrible risk for damage to oxidative phosphorylation? Obesity.
In my world, that's child abuse.
Well, it's not it's child neglect. It's because of lack of knowledge. When you don't know stuff, okay, you can harm or put yourself at risk for different things because you're ignorant. Okay, so knowledge is power, and if you don't, and if you know that smoking has now replaced obesity has now replaced smoking as a major risk factor for cancer, why would anyone allow themselves to become obese if they understood this? Yet we have a worldwide obesity epidemic. Obesity now is replacing starvation as one of the health problems on the planet. Can you believe this?
I think because they create this processed food and Twinkies, I think they create them like drugs because people get addicted to them.
It's called glucose addiction. Okay, all of our existence on the planet was striving to get things that were sweet and tasty. We just did not have access to them. Now we have plenty of access to them. We have fast food stores on every corner here in this country. You don't even have to get out of your car to use the energy to walk inside. They hand it right through the window. That's a hell of a lot easier than having to track down a woolly mammoth, stab it and chop it up and get something to eat and take the marrow out of his bones as your power energy source. I'd rather get a hamburger handed through a window to me. It makes perfect sense, and we become brain addicted to glucose. If anybody doesn't believe me, try not eating for 3 days. Just drink water. You're going to come to know real fast how addicted you are to glucose.
Yeah, I've done that. I've done those water
It's
fasts.
right. It's hard to go.
Yeah.
So in the cancer protocols that we develop for clinical use, we transition. We recommend to the patients that they transition to a low carbohydrate diet for a week to 10 days, and then jump into water only fasting. It gives the body
Mm.
an opportunity to adjust. You just can't go cold turkey. It's very hard. Like if someone were addicted to cigarettes or alcohol, to go cold turkey, people do it. It's not
Yeah.
easy,
No,
but for breaking the glucose addiction, you can still maintain energy in your body. You're just not taking carbs, and that can be tough. Believe me.
it is
Just
really
yeah,
tough.
just go. Don't eat any carbohydrates for 10 days, and you start to feel a little, strange
I
after a
feel
while.
I used to be addicted to nicotine
Yeah,
back in the couple of years ago, and I quit cold turkey.
yeah,
And you get crazy.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
in a couple of hours, I got crazy with
Oh
nicotine,
yeah. Well, so with
and
glucose. Try glucose.
yeah, I did, and I mostly eat meat
Yeah,
nowadays.
yeah,
But when you cheat sometimes,
yes,
and you feel like shit the day
yeah,
after, and then you go and then you go back
yeah,
to eating just meat, for example,
yeah.
no carbs.
Well,
And the first day is fine, second day is fine, third day is fine, but after the fourth and fifth day, I can feel the same withdrawal symptoms
yeah.
from nicotine. I feel it here in
Oh
my
yeah,
jaw. I feel it in the
yeah.
skin. I just want to sit in the car and just drive to
Yeah, well, that's all
McDonald's.
that's all neurotransmitter shifting, and your
Yeah,
metabolic behaviors shift. But it's perfectly understandable when you know the evolution of our species, and you know that our technology has constantly produced more and more of the things that our biology wants. Our Paleolithic ancestors simply had no access to these kinds of foods. The technology to produce them and distribute them was not available any more than when you look at the chimpanzees or gorillas in the zoos or in their natural life in the jungle. Um, they're living according, and we see that there has never been a documented case of breast cancer in a female chimpanzee. They're living according to their diet and lifestyle. I went to the zoo and I asked the veterinarian, why don't you give the chimpanzee some jelly donuts and pizza and burritos and hamburgers and the stuff that we eat and French fries and all the stuff that we kind of like to eat. And she said that would be animal cruelty. Yet we're 98% similar to these guys. They don't have any cancer, and we're riddled with cancer. What's the difference here? We deviated dramatically from who we were as a Paleolithic species to this new environment, which is advanced technology. And to our technology to provide poorly processed carbohydrates and very, very tasty food at the ready all over has created a problem in our physiology. We get obese, we get dementia, we get cancer, we get type 2 diabetes, macular degeneration, cardiovascular disease, because we have deviated from our evolutionary past very fast. Our technology has outpaced our biology, and we are
yeah.
paying a major health price for this.
So is dementia also caused by lifestyle?
A large part of it is. There are only a
Hmm.
few genes, presenilin mutations, and a couple of these kinds of things that put you pretty much at risk for early onset Alzheimer's and various kinds of dementias. But a large part of it is diet and lifestyle.
Because my grandfather and all his siblings, they all got it.
Yeah, well,
So we're scared, the men in our family.
they could inherit a risk factor, or they could be eating the same poor. They could have been in the same poor diet and lifestyle. It's one or the other, or some combination.
Yeah,
That we know about. But clearly, the brain needs energy, and brain is our neurons need to be cared for the same way our liver and kidney and colon need to be cared for. Um, if you keep your mitochondria healthy, it's very hard to get cancer. And that was the conditions that we evolved in. All of the foods and our diet and lifestyle kept mitochondria extremely healthy. We were mostly burning very few carbohydrates because what are we getting our carbohydrates from? we eat an animal, right? If
Yeah.
you eat his liver, then you have glycogen stored in the liver. If you eat the muscle, there's glycogen stored in there. So glycogen is long trains of glucose, but it's not sweet, but it's carbohydrate. Um, so we could get organ meat. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the natural animals go for organ meat before they go for muscle because there's
Hmm.
tremendous amount of vitamins stored and carbohydrate stored in organ meats, especially
Okay.
the liver. So a lot of animals do this. They're not thinking about it. They're hardwired through evolutionary process to do this. We're the ones that invented all the technology to make foods tasty and spicy and do all the things we like. But during the Paleolithic period, where would we get sweet honey? I always, honey was sweet. And believe me, the land of milk and honey, let's be honest, we know we want that honey, right? I
Yeah.
always want to know, and I never can figure this out, who was the first member of our species that knew how to reduce the anger of bees by smoking the hive.
Hmm.
You smoke the hive, the bees seem to go into the tranquilized state. They don't sting you. The
Yeah.
dumbass bear has to stick his face into the hive, get his whole eyes and everything stung. He had not
Yeah.
figured out how to smoke those bees to get the honey without being stung. That's what
Yeah.
you call human ingenuity and
Okay.
rational thinking. And when we indoctrinate people, whether it's religion or some political affiliation or some incorrect theory, we remove the capability of rational thinking, and we just do stuff because we've been indoctrinated to do it. And but we have a credible flexibility. Our technology has advanced at such leaps and bounds. But does that mean we're going to stop eating all the things that we enjoy? No. But I think the knowledge of eating too much of that, knowing that you're becoming obese, puts you at risk for all kinds of chronic diseases. So you become empowered to know what to do to live on the planet in a healthy way. I'm not saying don't eat Twinkies. I'm just saying that if you eat them every day, they
Hmm.
could damage part of your body and put you at risk for various chronic diseases. So
Yeah.
everything is understandable when you think of if you understand evolutionary biology. And to be honest with you, that is a rare commodity in the world today. Very few people have no clue about evolutionary biology. And if they did, the obesity epidemic is evolution in action. You want to
Yeah.
know about biological evolution? Look at around and see the fat people that are walking around. We evolved as a starved species. Food was rare. We had to use tremendous energy. Very hard to get obese during the Paleolithic period of our existence on the planet. We evolved to be massively energy efficient, going for long walks, long distances, and now we're put within 100 years a completely new environment where all the things that we were craving are now at our fingertips, and we get fat, obese.
Hmm.
This is evolution in action. You're seeing it with your own eyes. Biological evolution. The obesity epidemic is biological evolution in action.
Yeah. Yeah. It's insane. But you mentioned that glucose is one of the fuels. So I would, my mind tells me to not eat carbs in a big number because that turns into sugar and that fuels the cancer cell. And this other fuel, glutamine, is there something we can do in our diet to change that, or to not? I mean, to not consume it
Well,
somehow,
don't
or
forget there's different types of carbohydrates as well. There's
yeah.
complex carbohydrates that are natural and some natural grains and things where energy is needed to break the carbohydrates down to get them to glucose. So there's some degree of biological enzymatic action that takes place in breaking down natural complex carbohydrates. It's the highly processed carbs that have no nutrition that are instantly infused into our blood. They're the more dangerous kind. Obviously, if you have cancer, you would try to reduce as much carbohydrate intake as you possibly can, going back more into a Paleolithic kind of diet and lifestyle. The glutamine is the most abundant amino acid in our bloodstreams. Um, it's essential amino acid. It keeps our gut healthy. Our immune cells use glutamine to fight infections. So
Hmm.
our urea cycle, glutamine is an incredible. They call it a non-essential amino acid because we can make it in our bodies from glucose, but it plays so many essential roles. in keeping our overall state of physiology in a healthy zone. So you can't be too aggressive. Now, the late George Cahill from the Joslin Diabetes Center here in Boston years ago did some studies on exercise in people, and they were able to show glutamine levels in the blood were going down with vigorous exercise. And we consider exercise as an essential component for managing cancer. Not only does it suck up the glucose in muscles, you have to realize muscle takes up glucose and converts it into glycogen, and muscle does not share. So when you exercise, your liver can share glucose because it breaks it down and puts it back into the bloodstream, but the muscle does not share, and the brain is a consumer of glucose. But the brain can shift to ketones. Muscle can shift to fatty acids and ketones for energy. It's geared to use sugar for sure, but and that's an evolutionary conserved part of our physiology, because if we are threatened by a predator, we need to run or fight, and that requires rapid energy fast, and that comes from the glucose stored in our muscles. And the brain uses it also, but the brain can shift to ketones. So it's a flexible. We have flexibility. The cancer cell is not flexible. It's locked into a dependency on fermentation involving glucose and glutamine. But if we go too drastic against the glutamine, not knowing the value of glutamine for maintaining metabolic homeostasis, we could harm patients. That's why in the press pulse therapy that we developed, which will become the eventual standard of care for managing all types of cancers, once the field comes to understand what I'm saying, you will need to know that targeting glutamine with drugs has to be done very carefully. Strategic dosage timing and scheduling, so that we don't cripple and paralyze our immune system, because we need the immune system to help heal the body and pick up the corpses of the dead cancer cells. Otherwise, we induce infections and things like this, and we weaken our immune system. So it's very important to know that glutamine is essential for the health of our guts and our immune system. And if we go too strong with drugs to target glutamine in our attempt to manage cancer, we could do some harm. The strategy that we are developing is maintaining health and vitality while we slowly degrade the cancer cell naturally. The problem, the body will come and heal itself when given the opportunity, once we target the very fuels leading to the dysregulated growth of those cells. We don't need glucose. We can push that down really, really far. And when we get it to a certain level, the brain and the muscle exercise will suck it up, taking it away from the tumor cells almost completely. So we can handle that side. The other side of the equation is, of course, the glutamine side, and that requires knowledge and understanding of what you're doing, why you're doing, and how best to achieve the management of the cancer, because you want to emerge from the treatment healthier than when you started. And this is not what is currently done. These cancer patients today look like skeletons. They're gaunt. They're unhealthy looking. Why is that? Because you're treating them with an approach that makes no sense in biology or evolutionary and biochemistry. It makes no sense, because you think cancer is a genetic disease. You do these inane things to think you're helping the patient. And in some cases you are, but you're also damaging. You have to be able to destroy the tumor without harming the rest of the body. And you need to do that with practice and understanding. And each person is a different metabolic entity. You can't use the same exact strategy on all people the same way. You have the vegan, you have the pescatarian, you have the Mediterranean guy, you got the carnivore guy, you got some guy with one religion and another guy with another religion. You have one guy with one culture and another guy with a different culture. You have to strategize your therapies to know differences in age, sex, cultural background, religious background, so that you can build a diet drug combination appropriate for that person under those conditions. And that's all going to be part of the new evolution of cancer management. So physicians are going to have to know all of these different aspects of their patient before they elicit a strategy for managing the disorder that person must have. This is going to be exciting. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
This is going to be super exciting to understand how we manage cancer effectively.
But how hopeful are you that it's going to be approved and used by
Well,
physicians?
I mean, the science tells us what we need to do. The biology and the science and the biochemistry tell us what we need to do. So, how long it takes for this to become standard of the care depends on the institutions that are currently managing the problem. If they are resistant to this, then it might not happen for a while. It will happen. I have no doubt about it. You know why? People want to live.
Yeah.
People want to live. They don't want being poisoned and irradiated and surgically mutilated. They want to live. So if people understand what I'm saying, they're going to want to know what the hell I'm saying. And they're the ones that are eventually going to be the pressure to change the system because it ain't coming from the top. I can tell you right now. They're all fat and happy, backslapping, making a lot of money on this whole cancer thing. And they love the somatic mutation theory because it's very profitable.
Yeah, I was going to say that you guys have a natural enemy in big pharma and money.
Well,
So
why would there be an enemy? Are they not concerned with human outcome?
it doesn't seem like it.
Well, maybe
I
we
mean,
should
if
ask
you look
them.
at the numbers,
Why,
yeah.
why doesn't somebody ask them? I'm telling this stuff all the time. I don't see some guy from pharma coming on and say, "Let me show you the science that doesn't make sense." Where are they? If you think I'm wrong, tell me what number you'd like me to change. The issue here is it's either right or it's not right, and it's either scientifically supported or it's not. We can just
Yeah,
look
but
at the
I think what
statistics.
I mean is a lot of people will lose a lot of money for because I think chemotherapy makes a lot of money for
Okay,
people.
then that should be what we tell the cancer patients when they come into the clinic. We have to
Yeah,
do this because we got to make money on it. I'm sorry. I know there's
yeah,
another therapy that could manage your disease quite effectively, but because it's not profitable, we can't use that on you. What the hell is that patient going to say? Thank
yeah.
you. I'll be a guinea pig for your next clinical trial on some toxic drug. The poor patients don't know. Once the patients understand this, a little bit of the science and a little bit, there's going to be a worldwide outcry on this stuff. Are you kidding me? These people, once they wise up, they're not going to want to take this crap that they're giving these people.
Yeah, and that's one reason why I wanted to talk to you as well, so people here in Sweden also can listen to you and what you have done, and so I hope it spreads
Well,
even
it
more.
will. It's just a matter of time. But I'm not. I don't want to say that we can't use any of the tools that we have already developed. Because listen, when we do metabolic therapy, we don't always see a complete resolution of the tumor. We see something that's still there. Okay. Now it might be possible to come in with a blast of radiation to get rid of that, or potentially an immunotherapy. Because listen, if you have what was a big angry tumor with many different heterogeneity and you shrink that thing down to something small with metabolic therapy, it's likely that all the surviving cells in that lesion have something in common. Therefore, a precision immunotherapy that hits the common target could wipe
Hmm.
that thing out real quick. The problem is you don't do it up front, you do it as a final step in the eventual resolution. We have already all the tools necessary for an effective management of cancer non toxically. We just simply are not using them in the correct sequence and in the appropriate timing and dosage for these things. We already have. Cancer can be easily managed once physicians are trained and we know how to use the tools in the appropriate way that we already have in the toolbox. And this is going to happen because people, as I said, the system is not working. People are
Yeah.
dying miserably and suffering miserably. And we can change that once they realize it's a mitochondrial metabolic disease and not a genetic disease.
And what's the process? I mean, I'm trying to identify where you guys are with the process of getting your method approved. Is it at some like FDA stage or?
Well, that's a good point. They always say, well, we can't do it because there's no clinical trials. Well, who's going to do a clinical trial when nobody knows what to do or how to do it? We're doing a lot of case reports. We have a big treatment protocol that's under review now for publication. So, in other words, and we have over 20 authors, scientists, and MDs, physicians on this. Once you are given a protocol, a comprehensive protocol, what to do and how to do it, then you have something in hand and you can read it and say, okay, I can put this together. I'm licensed to practice medicine. A lot of what you're saying here, I can do. Okay. So anybody that's trained to be a practice medicine, a license to practice medicine. And the other thing you have to realize that a lot of the success for metabolic therapy comes from the individual. When the individual knows what's going on and they're playing an active role in the management of their disease, they become empowered. So not everybody, believe me. There's some people say, Doc, I don't care. Just do whatever you need to do. They don't want to even think about what they have. Well, those poor folks are finished anyway. By the grace of God, they may survive. But there's a lot of people that really like to measure their own glucose and ketones. They're taking the measurements themselves, and they're telling the physicians, this seems to work better on me. And it's a feed forward. And I build preclinical testing. We do a lot of in mice that have natural tumors, not these genetically engineered monstrosities and these crazy things that they use. Every model has value. There's no question about it. But if you're using genetic models that have no representation of the real world, I use all natural models that developed in these animals naturally. And therefore, when you manage those things, you go to the clinic, you see as a matter of fact, humans do a hell of a lot better than the mice do. Because our metabolic rate is much slower. So we have a greater opportunity to develop dosage, timing, and scheduling with humans than we have in this accelerated mouse metabolism. But our work is showing tremendous therapeutic effect in case reports. And Maggie and Brad Jones are collecting a registry of all these guys that were all terminal, stage 4 various cancers. Hi, I'm alive. I'm feeling good. I'm still here. I'm still alive. And what the hell's going on? These guys should be dead, and they're alive. So
in humans.
Yeah.
Wow.
So but there's no clinical trial to document this. So and then, as I said, the way the pharmaceutical hospital establishment, they do double-blind crossover on a single drug or a single procedure. You can't do that with metabolic therapy. We got to change. You either got to adapt or get out of the way. Each person is their own unique entity. We have to adjust as we go along. We have to reduce or increase different strategies so that we can understand better doses, timing, and scheduling. And as I said, everybody's a different entity. What works on one person may not be as effective on another person. Diet, lifestyle, this all comes together. You have to really look at each as an individual. And then you can start generalizing things once you have a better understanding of how to work. And we're seeing individuals working tremendously. Like Pablo Kelly, he's still alive. Is he cured? No, he's not cured. And I think we should forget about this word cure. It's an obnoxious word. Who has the cure for cancer? And everybody says, oh, no one can cure cancer. The idea is, let's think of management. Why don't we think of how we can manage the disorder better than we're currently doing? And the person lives longer on the planet with a higher quality of life. What the hell is wrong with that? And if you don't have a cure, we can't talk to you about anything. Well, what's wrong with an effective management? Is something wrong with that? Give me a break. I mean, we have to rethink the whole process, and it all comes down to what theory do you think what is the underlying theory for the practice that you're treating the disease? And if you ask some of these guys say, I have no clue. I was just told to do this. Well, man, you got to start thinking about what you're doing. You can't be naive about this whole thing. Think of the theory that's driving the dysregulated growth. Is your treatment going to stop the availability of glucose and glutamine and transition the body over to fuels that the tumor cells can't use? And then you can work from there. At least you get a grip on the disease. You can slow it down, and then you can work strategically to eliminate the surviving tumor cells. I tell you, man, it's going to be really exciting. I can't. Yeah. I don't know if I'll live long enough to see it. But it's going to be exciting, and people are going to get super healthy, and they're going to feel a hell of a lot better. And from what we're seeing is the guys with type 2 diabetes, that goes away along with the cancer. Hypertension and high blood pressure seem to go away or get reduced or minimized, whatever you want to call it. And if you look at our press pulse strategy, you'll see the actual strategy that we have. I publish open access. Anybody on the planet that has access to a computer, they can go to Google, look up my name, say Press Pulse, and you can see the future. You can see the future right there. It's a skeleton. It's a framework. It's not fleshed out yet, but it will be as we move forward with our understanding of what cancer is.
I sure hope so. And I'm sorry if my question sounds stupid sometimes because I'm just an amateur. But you keep saying the clinical trials. Is that something that needs to be like approved for you guys to do it? Is it like a step in a process
It's an
to
obstacle.
get? It's an
Yeah,
obstacle.
it's an obstacle. So one way to say that we don't know what we're doing and it can't work is because there's no clinical trial. So they say, I can't. I really think you're talking great. I think you talk the talk, but I can't believe anything unless I see a clinical trial. Well,
But
who
how
the
do you
hell
get a
is going to do
clinical
the clinical
trial?
trial?
But how do you, can you get someone to make it or?
Well, that's another thing. Is there any level of motivation? Like you said, is there any revenue to be generated from a clinical trial and water-only fasting, a
Mm,
ketogenic diet, metabolic therapy? The answer is generally no. So we have to have an entrepreneur come in, and we have to figure out some guy who can figure out how to make a profit or replace some of the revenue generation, so that we can establish this. Because the reason why we don't want to do it, we can't do a clinical trial, because who's going to generate revenue from what I'm saying at this point in time?
okay.
So
Okay.
it's always, they're not scientific arguments for why we can't do this.
No.
It's, oh, I can't believe you unless I have a clinical trial. That's not a scientific argument.
But
You know,
I'm thinking as a like a country like Sweden, we have public health care. We don't have so much private, and I don't think there's as much as financial interests or drug interests as you have
well,
in America. Wouldn't it be easier to do the trials and try to develop it in a country like Sweden with public
yeah.
health
Well,
care?
why don't you go? You go check it out and see what happens. You'll get slapped down.
Yeah,
The Swedes are no more flexible than the Americans or the Norwegians.
yeah,
They're all locked into the same. It's a tranquilization of the brain. They've all been trained to think one way, and when somebody comes along and says that might not be correct, they all join together and say no. So it's a mindset. And I want to get somebody to challenge the science. Not these superficial things like there's no clinical trial, or if you were right, I would have learned about it in medical school, or we would have spoken about it, or I would have read about it. How come all the big grants that are being awarded are for genetic therapies and immunotherapies? If you're right, how come they continue to do that? Because they lack knowledge and they're locked into silos. They call silo think. So yeah, there's a lot of all obstacles, but not scientific obstacles, non-scientific obstacles, revenue generation issues, status quo issues, just all of these kinds of things that stand in the way. All I can say is the walls are rattling, and people are demanding change, and they better either get on the bandwagon or get the hell out of the way, because this is coming. Metabolic therapy is coming. It's just we don't know how long it's going to take for the field to recognize this.
yeah. I really hope so. But I see so many obstacles on the way, unfortunately. Like you see companies, the same company produces medicine and they produce food in the same company. Even that sounds really weird.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
I mean,
how can one
yeah,
company do medicine and food?
yeah. Well, if you eat bad food, you get sick and you need the medicine.
Yeah,
It's not
it
complicated.
shouldn't be allowed.
Well, it's allowed. People, that's globalization of the food industry. So, and that's why we have a worldwide epidemic of obesity, and the problems are happening worldwide. And I'm not saying that we have to change all this. All I'm saying is we need to do it in a better way. I'm not saying we shouldn't eat pizza and hamburgers. I like pizza and hamburgers. I don't eat Twinkies, but I do eat. I drink whiskey and I drink beer and I drink wine.
Yeah,
And I'm not saying get rid of this stuff. All I'm saying is that we need to know how we develop certain diseases and what we can do to at least reduce the risk of getting those diseases. And if you do get the disease, then you have a strategy, a natural, scientifically established strategy for managing that disease. So all of this will come to pass because we're not stupid although I don't want to say that for maybe there are stupid people, but it's not so much stupidity as it is a locked in ideology. Ideology, man, kills it's like the worst thing that ever happens to our natural rational mind. We evolved as a species with rational thinking, but ideology squashed that out of us.
Yeah,
And sometimes it restricts our ability to be more flexible.
it does. It does. Yeah, I mean, ideologies. I've said this in previous episodes. I don't like ideologies. I'm neither left or right or anything. I
Yeah,
think
well,
ideologies, yeah, they're
that's the
dangerous.
yeah, but as a species, we're prone to it's comforting to be locked into an ideology, a dogma, a belief, a system that's irrefutable, a truth that can never be challenged.
Yeah, but I think
And
it's because our nature is tribal. We're a tribal
yes,
species. Yeah,
absolutely. And we work together as groups to kill animals and eat them.
yeah, yeah,
But now we have big armies and we have big societies. And this is the natural evolution of our species. But our technology has far outpaced our biology, and that can account for the chronic disease epidemic that we have worldwide. And once people come to realize that, we'll do better. And then maybe it'll translate over to politics and other and other problems that the world has. But I can't think about that now. All I can think about is how we can kill cancer cells without toxicity
yeah,
through strategic understanding of evolutionary biology and biochemistry.
yeah. And if we try to wrap up things, what advice would you give people to in a prevention mode to not have
Keep your mitochondria healthy.
how?
If your mitochondria can stay healthy, it's hard to get cancer, diabetes. It's hard to get all these different kinds of things.
Yeah,
And nutritional ketosis is the way to keep your mitochondria healthy. There's bioenergetic principles behind burning ketones versus burning pyruvate for energy. So this was all worked out by my late colleague Richard Veach from the National NIH. So all of this is based into foundational biochemistry, bioenergetics. And if you keep your mitochondria healthy by diet and exercise, you reduce significantly your risk for all these different kinds of things. But if you don't know that, then you put yourself at risk. It's not that complicated.
yeah. And if my listeners want to learn more about your work, they can just Google your name and yeah,
Yeah,
but you have a book as well.
yeah. I
And
have my book is put out by John Wiley Press, selling more copies now than it was when I first published it in 2012. So
great.
somebody must be realizing something.
Yeah,
Um, the book has a lot of heavy science, but it also has a lot of stuff for regular folks in there. Also, all of our research is supported by philanthropy and private foundations. That's why I can pretty much say and do what I like, mainly because I'm doing the research next door according to what I think is important. I design the experiments with my colleagues, and our goal is to see how long we can keep animals that have stage 4 terminal cancer alive. And then we just translate that back into the clinics in humans, and we see even better results, actually.
wow.
But philanthropy, there are people on the planet who are intrinsically interested in helping humankind, and they don't feel that they have to make a profit on that.
No,
And those folks support us.
yeah,
And just individuals contribute through my university, Boston College, to our work. So, and I thank them, and we'll all benefit immensely as we move forward, because the world is coming to know through channels like yours and many others that there is an alternative based on solid science that can have a major impact on how we understand and manage disease, especially chronic diseases. So this is coming. It'll be probably it'll probably be slow at first, but with these podcasts and more papers that I publish that people can read, I'm not hiding any of this. It's out in open access, peer-reviewed publications in the scientific literature. So if people want to read about the press pulse metabolic therapy, it's out there. It's published in Frontiers or I think we did that in Nutrition and Metabolism, which is a BMC journal series. So it's out there. It's open access. People can read it. They read it sometimes, and they feed back me information saying, I read your paper. I really enjoyed it, but you left out one little thing here that could improve it. And I go, my God, he's right. This person is some lay guy, right? He didn't
yeah,
have to work at Harvard, Yale University to figure it out. He just came to know. Sometimes it's a physician. Sometimes it's a exercise physiologist. And then all of a sudden, I check it. We check the mice, and all of a sudden you say, oh, damn, this guy was right. this is this is a work in progress here, but it's going to be exciting. I'm hopeful that it will gain grassroots. It's going to be a grassroots kind of a thing.
Yeah.
People want to stay healthy. They
Yeah,
want
of
to feel
course.
good about themselves,
Yeah, that's how I learned.
and they can.
I learned from podcasts and people like you. I didn't learn hear this from like mainstream news, and so that's how I learned. I mean, to
Yeah,
get more healthy. Yeah, and of
yeah,
course, you shouldn't believe everything you see, but you should look from different angles, perspectives, and like make up your own mind.
yeah. Well, that's exactly right. Make it, but also check the facts.
Yeah,
If people say, "Oh, this is can cure cancer and do this," okay, show me the scientific publication and the evidence that you did this.
yeah,
I want to see the preclinical data. I want to take a deep look at it. And then they say, "Well, we don't have that. We just think about it." Well, what the hell?
yeah,
I base everything on publication. Go look at that. Go look at our. We have some beautiful papers out there. I'm all excited. We're writing new ones, preclinical
and
stuff.
where can we read them?
Say again.
Where can we read the publications?
They're in open access.
Open access.
Just my name. Just put down Thomas Seyfried Cancer Publications, and then you'll get a whole slug of them, and they can go through them, all of them. I put them out there in open access so people can read the literature and come to their own. Like you said, make your own mind up based on the evidence that you're reading, and then go look out and say, I publish case reports with my physician colleagues, guys with stage 4 lung cancer to the brain cancer, breast cancer, and you can see the results yourself. Now, people say, "Oh, that's an N of 1." Well, damn, N of 1. This guy's alive today and doing very well. You think they care whether it was an N of 1? Why don't we put more people? Maybe we'll have an N of 2,
Yeah,
and then an N of 10,
yeah.
and then an N of 1,000. So it's happening. It's happening.
Yeah. Hey, Professor, I wish you all the best, you guys. I hope this spreads as much as possible, and I hope you guys can open up clinics and cure people. I mean, that's the end game here and the goal, I guess. I mean, if you guys
Yeah,
can, yeah, I mean, spread it to the world, to Sweden, to Denmark, to Norway, to the whole world.
yeah,
I really wish you all the best. And
yeah. Thank you very much. We're working at. We're not going anywhere. We're still
yeah,
working on it.
yeah, and
So,
and thanks for
you know,
taking time to talk with us as well.
yeah. Well, thank you. Okay, I'll let you go now.